Special greetings, brothers and sisters from Taiwan. It's a wonderful joy and an honor to be able to join with you as we commemorate the birthday of Hudson Taylor, my great grandfather, born in the city of Barnsley on May 21, 1832. And of course, if you're familiar with his life, you'll know that at the age of 21, in 1853, he left England and set sail for China. After 163 days, he arrived on March 1st, 1854, to begin his missionary service. Of course, he went on to serve there in China for 51 years, passing away in June of 1905, June 3rd. There in the city of Changsha in the province of Hunan, which is right in the middle there of China. Eventually, he was buried in the city of Zhenjiang beside his first wife, Maria. And we commemorate not only his birthday, but we commemorate a life that was greatly used by the Lord and serves as one of those amongst the cloud of witnesses, as the book of Hebrews 12 tells us, that surround us, that we might also run with endurance the race that is set before us, setting aside the things that so easily entangle us, fixing our eyes on Jesus. As I have reflected upon just Hudson Taylor's birthday, the word that comes to mind actually is this word faith. And of course, if you're familiar with the Christian faith, you'll know that faith is a very central component, a central truth to the Christian belief. There in 1517, Martin Luther found spiritual redemption and release from those familiar words in Romans chapter 1, that the just shall live by faith alone. And that became the catchword of the Reformation, as you remember. And certainly, I think if we turn to the New Testament, we would find that this word faith in the Greek, in its various forms, in its noun form, in its adverb form, or adjective form, its verb form, etc. We would find actually that this word faith in its various forms appears 561 times in the New Testament. 561 times. And so just within the New Testament itself, it's a very central and a very important truth, this word faith. And just as the book of Hebrews, the writer there in the 11th chapter, this is what he says. He says, without faith, it is impossible to please God. Without faith, it is impossible to please God, because anyone who comes to him must believe, anyone who comes to God must believe that God exists and that God rewards those who earnestly seek after him. Without faith, it's impossible to please God, because those who come before him must believe that he exists, and he rewards those who earnestly seek him. Faith. And of course, within the mission agency that Hudson Taylor founded, faith was also a very important truth that guided the mission. And so if you have the chance to go to our headquarters there in Singapore on Cluny Road, you will find, as you just walk in, come in from the main road there, you'll see those very familiar words, have faith in God. Have faith in God, found there in the book of Mark, the 11th chapter, verse 22. Have faith in God. And I'd like to just, in these moments that follow, just focus very quickly on four components of Hudson Taylor's faith, four areas, four aspects of his faith in God. The first phrase that comes to mind was Hudson Taylor's faith. I call it a consecrating faith, a consecrating faith. Actually, this consecrating faith in many ways was something that he obviously saw in his parents as well. For if you're familiar with Hudson Taylor's story, you will know that actually, even before Hudson Taylor was born, his parents dedicated dedicated their firstborn to be a missionary in China. Just think with me for a moment of what that kind of consecrating faith by Hudson Taylor's parents, James and Amelia Taylor, had. Especially in that day and age where travel was certainly, one, not as convenient, and two, not as safe as travel is today. And yet their heart's desire was that their son, their firstborn, just as in the Old Testament, their first son would be a missionary to China. And so in many ways, I believe that in Hudson Taylor's parents, he saw this consecrating faith that they had. Well, certainly in Hudson Taylor's life, we also see this consecrating faith. If you remember his own conversion experience there at the age of 16 or 17, through the prayer of his mother, as well as his younger sister, Amelia. You remember that Hudson Taylor had this very graphic conversion experience. They're sitting in his father's study, reading that small gospel tract and being caught by that phrase, "It is finished." One of the 7 sayings of Jesus on the cross. It is finished. And there he gave his life to the Lord. He rededicated his life to the Lord. And it was only after the fact that in comparing notes with his mother, that at that very same moment, his mother was praying earnestly on her knees beside her bed for the conversion of her son. And yet it's interesting to note that it wasn't long after that kind of consecrating faith of Hudson Taylor also impressed upon him the call for missions and the call to go to China. And as we read through his life, we would see that his life was indeed a life of consecrating faith, of setting it apart to serve the Lord and to serve the Lord only. And so consecrating faith is the first phrase that very much comes to mind as I think of Hudson Taylor's life. And my prayer, brothers and sisters, as we gather to commemorate, to celebrate Hudson Taylor's life, it would also be with that sense of, Lord, enable me to also have that consecrating faith. Consecrating faith. Those of you who will know the story of a CIMer who actually never made his way to China, he passed away on his way to China, William Borden. And what a wonderful story of also consecrating faith. On his way to China, on his way to the northwest part of China to serve the Lord among the Muslims there. He was in Egypt studying under Samuel Zwemer, who you will know was one of the greatest apostles to the Islamic world. They're studying Arabic. They're studying the Islam faith. He passed away there in Egypt. And in fact, if you go to Egypt, you can still find his tomb there in the American cemetery. But you remember in his life those 3 important phrases: no reserve, no regret, and no retreat. No reserve, no regret, no retreat. Consecrating faith. And my prayer for myself, for us, as we commemorate, as we celebrate Hudson Taylor's birth, his life, it would be with a renewed sense that the Lord would enable you and enable me to have that kind of consecrating faith in our lives. No reserve, no retreat, and no regret. And so the first phrase that comes to mind is consecrating faith. Consecrating faith. The second aspect of faith that comes to mind is confident faith. Confident faith. And just as I reflect back on Hudson Taylor's life, the confidence that he had in God, the certainty that he had in God, that confident faith that he had in God was something that very much can be traced right through his life, even before he went to China, in those familiar stories of how he was studying medicine and how his employer at the pharmacy forgot to give him money, give him his salary. And even though there was a struggle in his life, in his heart, you remember he went to visit some poor people, and there in his pocket was some money, and he sensed the call upon God to give that money, and there was that struggle there, but yet, and eventually he overcame that struggle, and he gave his money to that poor family. And yet I believe there was that sense of deep confidence. Confidence not in his own faith, but confidence in the faithfulness of God. Confident in the faithfulness of God. And of course, you'll remember as he went to China originally with the Chinese Evangelization Society, and he was with them but a few years and resigned actually over the fact that they were taking loans out to pay for missionary salaries. And that was something that obviously went very much against what Hudson Taylor believed. He had a deep conviction, as he was quoted as saying, that God's work done in God's way would not lack God's provision. What a wonderful phrase. God's work done in God's way will not lack God's provision. And so Hudson Taylor's faith was a confident faith, Could I just share very quickly maybe how that has impacted my life as I have served here, even though I'm still a part of OMF, but thankfully OMF graciously loaned my wife, Mimi, and I to China Evangelical Seminary here in Taiwan, where we have been serving the last 4+ years. But I remember at the installation of my presidency here at the seminary, I was asked, as CES was at that point facing some very real financial difficulties. We had just moved into a new campus, a new location, and we were still in debt, actually close to $3 million. And so I was asked, how are you going to face this whole area of the financial need of China Evangelical Seminary? And it was that phrase, God's work done in God's way will not lack God's provision. That came back to me so clearly in answering that reporter. And thankfully to God, yes, it's really not my faith or even Hudson Taylor's faith, but rather confidence in God's faithfulness. And just a quick witness and a testimony that today CES, China Evangelical Seminary, not the CES that Hudson Taylor went to China to serve under initially, but CES Seminary here in Taiwan. We are completely debt-free. So thankful to God's faithfulness. But I just thought of that phrase, a confident faith in God's provision, a confident faith in God's faithfulness. And so his faith first and foremost was a consecrating faith. Then it was a confident faith. A third area that comes to mind, a third aspect of Hudson Taylor's faith, I've called it courageous faith. A sense of boldness, a sense of risking, trusting on God in the presence of what might seem as almost impossibilities. Actually, Hudson Taylor himself said, if there wasn't an element of risk, there would be no need for faith. If there wasn't an element of risk, there would be no need for faith. And so Hudson Taylor's faith was a courageous faith. And of course, many stories in Hudson Taylor's life come to mind. Incidentally, let me quickly say that this courageous faith is not a reckless kind of a faith. If you're familiar with his story, you'll know that actually on his first journey to China, he sensed that it would be a sign of not trusting God to put on a life preserver there on the boat as they faced various storms along the way. And he felt that, hey, if I put on a life preserver, that's a sign of not trusting God, not trusting God. But eventually he realized that actually that life preserver was perhaps a means that God provided for him, just in case there was a shipwreck of some sort. And so it wasn't, it was a risk. It was a faith that was willing to take a risk, but it wasn't reckless. It wasn't reckless. It was a risk, but it wasn't a reckless kind of a faith. It was a courageous faith, a courageous faith, a faith that would be willing to step out, so to speak, to use that imagery from Peter's life, to step out of our comfort zone or out of that certainty. And trust completely upon God, to take that risk. And certainly the beginning of the CIM was very much an aspect of how that faith was a courageous kind of a faith. You remember there on June 25, 1865, there on the beach of Brighton, where Hudson Taylor was deeply moved by the spiritual need of the 300 million Chinese, especially in the inland parts of China, without the gospel of Jesus Christ, and how God laid upon his heart that day on that beach to dedicate himself. It's interesting, I go back and read his diary, and he says of how God conquered his unbelief. God conquered his unbelief, and he dedicated himself. And that was the beginning of the CIM, of sending missionaries, not just to the coast, but to the inland parts of China, to spread right across China, sometimes in tremendous challenges, sometimes in tremendous difficulties, and even lives being threatened. And yet it wasn't reckless, but there was a risk element to Hudson Taylor's faith. His faith was a courageous faith, a courageous faith. And my friends, brothers and sisters, how desperately you and I today perhaps need also something of that kind of courageous faith in our lives, a courageous faith in our lives. Well, just very quickly, I thought of that faith as a consecrating faith. I thought of that faith as a confident faith. I thought of that faith as a courageous faith. Just very quickly, lastly, obviously, I think Hudson Taylor's faith was also a contagious faith, a contagious faith. And certainly, I think as we look at the history of the CIM, how Hudson Taylor's faith spread to the lives of other CIM missionaries, and how his faith, how his contagious faith has impacted missions from the beginning of the CIM, 1865, until today. How many people, as I have traveled the world over, how many people have come up to me and have shared with me the impact of Hudson Taylor's story, his life, and how that has impacted their lives and has molded them, has challenged them, and has sent them forward into obedience to God's calling in their lives. His life was a contagious faith. He set an example for us to follow. And I pray, brothers and sisters, as we do celebrate this, the 193rd year anniversary of Hudson Taylor's birth, that we would ask the Lord to also give us that kind of faith, a consecrating faith, a confident faith, a courageous faith, and a contagious faith. Have faith in God. And I believe from the bottom of my heart, as we celebrate Hudson Taylor's life, that his desire would not be that he would be the center of the focus, but rather the Lord of whom Hudson Taylor served would be the center focus of our commemorating. And our prayer together would be that the Lord would grant us the same kind of faith that was exhibited in Hudson Taylor's life. That consecrating faith, confident faith, courageous faith, and contagious faith. And so blessings on each and every one of you as we pause to remember this very significant date in the life of not only Hudson Taylor, in my family, but certainly also in world missions. And we trust that even though there will only be one Hudson Taylor, we trust that the example that has been set for us by Hudson Taylor, as well as many others, would serve as an impetus and a challenge for each and every one of us to also have faith in God. Have faith in God.